Started by recording. So welcome everyone to our ReSourceYYC Lunch and Learn. So that everyone is aware, ReSourceYYC is a co-working community geared to professionals. We offer our lunch and learn sessions as a means for our community to network and provide meaningful learning opportunities. We also provide private office spaces, dedicated desks, day drop-ins, and virtual office options. If you're not yet a member with us, we encourage you to check out our website and follow us on social media. Links will be posted in the chat. So today we have our panelists. So we've got Sandra Gollnick, Sheila Carruthers, Jeff Griffiths, and Chris Sorensen. And I'll let them give themselves a little introduction. Let's start with Sandra.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Gollnick. I am now an entrepreneur, believe it or not, a little bit. I started my own hybrid/digital meeting planning company called Synergy Meetings, so that's kind of exciting. Prior to that, I worked with the Palliser and Alberta Health Services as a meeting specialist. Great, or Jeff.
Yeah, on my screen, I'm up here
Yeah,
to you.
you're beside me.
Anyway, okay. And therein lies one of the problems with virtual meetings. You never know where anybody is on their screen. Jeff Griffiths, one of the founders at Workforce Strategies International. We're a competency-based workforce and organizational development consultancy based here in Calgary. We've got jobs kind of all over the place these days. Living on Zoom since about this time last year, so it's been an interesting transition.
All right, I'll jump
in. Who's
in.
next? I don't know.
All right, I'll jump in.
Point in which direction?
Sheila Carruthers, I'm a management consultant. I specialize in public relations, strategic communication and business administration, as well as ethics, governance and social value for businesses and for nonprofits. So if you need someone to assess your social value initiatives or update your board's governance, succession planning, that's me. I have done a number of presentations in my lifetime, and so that's why I'm here today. Look forward to the debate. Chris, you're next.
You're up.
All right. So my name is Chris Sorensen. So I'm the president of Iteration Insights. We're a Calgary-based analytics consulting firm. Like a lot of you, been pushed into the online virtual world over the last year, and spending an inordinate amount of time in Teams and occasionally over in Zoom. But the majority of my time is all with Microsoft Teams.
And so we've got a little debate going on here between Jeff and Chris
Not a
about
debate.
the Teams
Not a debate.
platform.
It's just a question of preferences.
All right, we might as well start with that. What do you prefer, Chris?
Well, I prefer whatever my customers are using, and well, I shouldn't say luck enough, but primarily all of our clients are have a very heavy Microsoft footprint. So they are already over in Teams, so therefore are pretty comfortable in the Teams environment. Some using it better than others, and then occasionally I do shift beyond our Microsoft clients and then do need to do some stuff over in the Zoom space. I pretty much say everything right now is either Zoom or Teams. There's other platforms out there that I just haven't used in a very long time now, and I don't not sure we'll ever be going back to them, but we'll see.
Jeff?
Yeah, well, I mean, if anybody, as they jumped in, they heard us arguing about this, but I'm not a fan of Teams. I use it when I have to. My preferred, or my go-to is in Zoom, and simply because it seems to be easier to use for most of the world, and it's not as much of a resource pig for and because I find Teams just bogs my systems down completely. I mean, it's a very powerful tool. I'd prefer not to use it if I had that choice. I don't. So and we're going to wind up using Teams more and more in our business as well. simply because of it's part of that whole Microsoft ecosystem. But yeah, definitely not my preferred platform to do this kind of thing on.
And how this all came up was I was trying to log into my computer into Zoom, and Teams kept popping up and not letting me in. And I'm just like, ah. And so that's kind of what sparked the discussion, is that I was going, it just kept coming up and I couldn't shut it down.
So that's literally what you did do, Sandra. You shut everything down and restarted.
Yeah, and then I was perched, ready for the X when Microsoft Teams popped in. I was ready for the X.
Cut it out.
Kill it.
What about you, Sheila? What's your experience with all this?
Well, very similar actually, that Teams does try and take it over. So do other software. And in fact, I'll segue that into presenting when you're on a big conference platform. Same thing happened to me where I had practiced and rehearsed using my Zoom for a presentation. And then when I ended up making the presentation for the conference, it kind of warped everything because nothing worked the same way as it does when you're presenting on Zoom. And so that was a yikes, fix it as I go, as I'm presenting and trying to sound intelligent and making it work for the system that I was in. So I do like Zoom because it is really simple, but the biggest problem that we all have to face is that when we're using other systems, be it Teams or any of these other systems, we've got to be able to adapt and use those and practice on those, I guess, before we do big things.
Yeah, well, and that actually brings an interesting point. I know that we were talking about some different kind of topics of discussion that we could address, and that's one thing with larger conferences and platforms and things like that, is you really need some good support. Usually that's kind of my role, is that I would be the one trying to support you so that you weren't going, okay, I don't know how to do this. You have to have someone who's driving the presentations a little bit, just so that you can do the part that you're supposed to be there for, the presentation, not the technical glitches and such.
So Sandra, what are your preferred conference platforms? I know that's one of the questions Rose wanted to ask.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think I've been kind of dabbling in a lot of different ones. Zoom seems to be the one that, as we were mentioning, that most people will use just because of the breakout rooms and things like that. They're still able to do it. Interestingly enough, I'm in the process of planning an award ceremony on Zoom for the first week of May. So that will be a little bit of a test of managing things, because there's actually going to be about 200 people in attendance, and we have to be able to pick all the award recipients out. So it's going to be fun. We might have to meet at the local pub after that. I'm just joking. But there's a lot of different ones out there. You know, I was mentioning earlier today, even I was on a call for a new networking one for conferences and such, that's supposed to kind of replace the networking hour and things, called Twine. And it's funny because you look at it, you're like, oh, okay, well, it has a couple different features, but everything is sort of evolving. So you kind of have to wait and see sort of what's out there and who wants your attention sometimes.
Yeah, there was one that Jeff, I think you were on. Oh, I'm echoing. Sorry. I'm okay. Jeff, I think you were on Catalyst 2020, and I was as well. And they used Zoom, but within a conference platform. So you could link in, it was Hoover. And you could go in to the Hoover platform and interact there with the presenters and the chat. But if you were having problems, you could just sign into the Zoom link and watch it that way. The only problem was that then there were two sets of chats going on, one directly on the Zoom and one directly on the conference platform. So
yeah. And you'll find a lot for the larger conferences that there are platforms that embed, like you mentioned, embed Zoom within it, or probably eventually. I haven't seen Microsoft Teams in it, but I mean, that just means
it's only a question of time.
Yeah, exactly. But it has different platforms that you can look at so that you have more of an experience, like you're walking in the hallway with people and such. So it kind of elevates it just a little bit.
Yeah, the last one I was on that was like that was run out of eCampus Ontario. It was a micro-credentials forum. So it was an all-day long thing. And they used a platform called FeedLoop, which had
Yes.
Zoom embedded in it.
Yes.
And it was really well done, but they had like a cast of thousands behind the scenes running doing all the producing, which made it easy on us because we just had to show up and do what we do. And that was great. It was wasn't an ideal platform for the people in the room because we couldn't see who was out there. They green roomed you and then they threw you out there and you did what you did. So we could interact with on a panel discussion, like similar to this. So you can interact with the people that were on the panel with you and the moderator, but you couldn't see anybody else.
Yeah.
Unless they use the Q&A within the FeedLoop platform, you had no idea what was going on out there in the audience, and there was hundreds of people in the audience. We couldn't see them or interact with them until afterwards, when then we got to be in the audience while the next group was out there, and then now we could actually take advantage of the platform. So it would be great if there was a way to have both the interaction that you get in a system like this, but have the technical coolness that FeedLoop provided and all of the stuff around it. Because it was an excellent platform for running that size of a conference.
Well, and I think there is something to be said as a presenter too, to be able to see everybody, kind of holds everybody else accountable too, to make sure that they're actually honed in on you and, that type of thing. But yeah, I think, I don't know that I've seen that technology out, but again, it's just a matter of probably looking for it and seeing what's out there.
Yeah,
the
other one I guess is On24. See a lot of people using that for that kind of huge conferencey type thing as well. Sorry, I'm jumping in here. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, it's all right. I've only actually been to one, what I would consider conference, like in traditional style, where you have lots of people and lots of different sessions and stuff like that. It was with CP Alberta. I actually forget the name of the software they're using, but it was all proprietary and seemed to work okay. I'm not sure anybody's really doing the conference style stuff really that well, because it's just so hard to get together and kind of feel like you're in person having that, live chat and stuff like that. So we're trying, everyone's trying, but it's just none of them really hitting the mark, in my opinion. It's too hard to recreate it.
I actually was talking with I was training presenters for a conference, and just sort of giving them some tips, and I actually asked, what's your biggest fear or what's your biggest annoyance, and they all agreed with exactly what Jeff said, that it's not seeing your audience. And and I agree that I haven't come across a platform that does show you them, but I don't think people, it'd be a little bit like today. Notice that our audience, none of them have put on their camera. They're all very happy listening, watching, but they're not opening up their camera. So we can't see our audience that we're talking to. So thank goodness we've got a panel so that I feel that I'm talking to people. So that is quite typical.
So regarding that, we do have a question in the chat from Farine. And it's, what tips do you have for engaging participants in meetings? Apparently he's tried questions and survey polls. Lots of people are multitasking, checking emails, doing other work during these meetings.
Oh yeah, polls work. You can integrate them into, in fact, just before we came on, we were talking about polls, as well as you can upload questions ahead of time. It's all in the timing, you've got to practice it. But I do find that starting pretty soon after you start speaking is to have some sort of engagement activity. And so a poll is a great way to engage people. And you could use Mentimeter, and that way you get to see the results. If you've embedded it into your presentation, everyone gets to see what the results are in real time, which is a fun way I find to do it. But even if you're asking questions and getting people to answer in chat, it's in being interactive.
I was going to say, I actually watched that Mentimeter in action in a presentation a couple of days ago. Another neat feature that really engaged people, which was kind of interesting because I know the group of people and they're not too engaged, but they were putting the comments in. And it was going up on the screen, but it was keeping it anonymous. So it wasn't like, oh, Sandra thinks that this is great or something like that. And it was really interesting because I was looking like, wow, I know some of these people and I'm so surprised that they're participating, you know, but it was good because it was visual and they could see. I mean, you kind of run even back in the day when you were up at, you know, on the stage presenting, you know, you can try and engage your audience, but you're not going, hey, you, row 2, seat 3, do you have a question for me? You know, you still have to kind of make sure that you do that online, which probably is a touch easier because you can reach out to them.
In some ways, it kind of.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, in some ways, it kind of depends on, are you running a conference or are you running training sessions? The different things that you can be doing. Like if you're running training sessions, you can, you know, there's a lot of things that you can do the same. So, you know, keeping your doing thumbs up every now and again, did you understand it? Keeping the cameras on so you can make sure they're there and try and pick up on some body language. You know, I try to, you know, I've got my green screen back here. I've been trying recently to stand up and walk around like I'm actually in the room, even though I'm just walking around my, you know, office by myself to kind of make it feel a little bit more real for me. Because then if it feels more real for me, it might feel a little bit more real for them. And if it's, you know, online training and stuff like that, then, you know, trying to make it so that the materials that I'm going through and we're discussing will be up for questions later on, so that people are, you know, a little more encouraged to pay attention and not just kind of drift back and forth between emails and things like that. So doing checkpoints every now and again is very helpful.
Yeah, I think you know, and I'm going to ask Farine if to actually, you know, if you want, unmute and let's have a conversation around this. You talk about doing this in a meeting, and I think it's important to recognize, what's the purpose of the meeting, right? A meeting should be to either, you know, make a decision or pass on some information that's vital to the people that are in the meeting. Otherwise, they shouldn't be there. So engagement should never be a problem in a meeting. Where it becomes a problem is when you're doing, you know, talking head type stuff, similar to what we're doing here, right? And you know, and there is no engagement, and people have no stake in what's happening in the meeting. So
like those training sessions and webinars and conferences.
Yeah, but the question was specifically about meetings, and I wanted to ask Farine if you can. Are you talking, you know, online in general, or are we talking meetings like we're having a team meeting now kind of thing?
Yeah, it was more around meetings, because more like I'm a business analyst, so I do requirements gathering meetings, and I agree that like I try to have an agenda, I try to have the specific questions outlined, but I think sometimes like it's hard with a large group of people. And, you know, I might not know what each of their roles or their subject matter expertise is, but just I find that in a lot of the meetings I have, I can just tell that people aren't participating, they aren't answering the questions. And sometimes I've used techniques like try and call on a specific person. I mean, I don't want to put them on the spot, but I need to gather that information. But I think some of the tips you guys shared would help. Like maybe I could, you know, try to make it more fun and try to have like a poll or survey or use Mentimeter in there just to make sure that it breaks up kind of the intensity and that everyone does get a chance to talk and participate then. So
Yeah,
I appreciate the tip.
The other thing I found in a meeting environment, particularly if you're there to gather information, is to stop talking.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, because sometimes I have
See,
a
it worked.
presentation. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You know,
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Jeff. Is sometimes I've found that you just have to be comfortable with some silence, and that's often one of the hardest things. Is even when you're in person, sometimes you just have to be quiet and let someone else fill the space.
Yeah,
because we as speakers can fill it all day long, and we have to let other people fill that space too, and be comfortable with that silence.
And that
That's
really,
a good tip.
yeah, and that really is key, because it also gives people, like, you know, even though we're in, you know, you show up to the meeting, you're wanting to participate, it doesn't mean you're instantly engaged, and sometimes you might need to reflect for a moment. And silence isn't the worst thing. You know, maybe keep some movement so you don't think that somebody froze, but you know, but sometimes giving the participants an opportunity to reflect for a moment and then contribute, or, you know, figure out a way, as we mentioned before, that they don't necessarily have to speak up in front of everybody, because a lot of it's about there's a lot of information out there on what they call psychological safety, feeling safe in the meeting, being willing to share, and that's a whole different thing that I don't think people really anticipated, because I'm sitting in my living room, for instance. I should be very comfortable sharing, type of thing, but it still kind of puts you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Like maybe having more one-on-one meetings first before having a large meeting, and then I know some people just prefer to put their answers into the chat rather than saying it, and so you know that could be another technique too. So yeah, those are all good tips. Thanks.
Yeah, people can feel like they're interrupting less if you give them that chance of silence, right?
Yeah. Well, listening leads to speaking, right? And so if you create space by shutting up, right? I mean, everybody hates a vacuum, right? So if you leave and program what you're doing such that you are leaving those spaces for somebody else to fill in, it's exactly the way you would do it if you were in a face-to-face meeting, right? You just shut up and let people talk.
I think that's great, Jeff, for meetings and where you want to be interactive, but it's not so great when you're presenting.
Yeah, and I was very specifically talking about the meeting format, right? Where we're in and we're all in Zoom meetings all day, every day now, or Teams meetings if you're Chris.
But something else that I know that I've used for some smaller meetings is actually moderating them a little bit, so that when you don't hear people in the crowd, you know, maybe raising their hands, asking a question, is having some questions that you're like, oh, someone sent this in the chat. It was quite interesting that I did a presentation with a friend of mine, and she's just like, well, these are the things that I want to make sure that I touch on. So if nobody asks, I said, that's what, you know, you give me the question. But it was really interesting that I was able to frame it like, oh, thank you for sending that to me directly. Here's a question that we got from the chat. It was all stuff that I had on a Word document.
It's all canned.
Smoke and mirrors.
It's but very much, Rose did that as well, in fact, you know, and she's trying to wrangle us lot in. Good luck.
Yeah, but it also encouraged other people. Again, the safety aspect of it, almost, it encouraged other people to ask questions. You're like, oh, somebody else asked a question. Okay, I might ask a question. And real questions did come in.
Yeah, very clever. Rose, did you have any questions?
We don't have any that have popped up in our chat, but we did have a few ones just to keep the conversation going, and I think that's always good for panel or any speaking opportunity, just to make sure you stay engaged and keep going with what your focus was, right?
I'll pick up on one that you did ask us ahead of time, which was about screening for presenters in conferences, because I've just experienced that myself. And I think that for presenters, it is important to screen them for two things. One is the subject matter, that is this fitting and appropriate with the subject of the entire conference, and making sure that they are subject matter experts. But it's also screening to find out, what's their presentation level. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you axe them as being presenters if they don't have experience. And in fact, one conference that I was just working with the presenters, that was very explicitly explained that we're looking for new ideas, fresh topics for this conference. And if you haven't presented before, that's okay. We will train you. And I thought that was great. So the screening includes, identifying, okay, who needs what type of training, and then let's provide them with that before the conference.
Well, and something else I know that it is interesting when it comes to sort of the screening or prepping of the presenters is actually making sure that their style will work for online, because attention spans aren't the same, as it would be in person. And also kind of making sure, I mean, we're all really great in frames, but a lot of people don't necessarily know little tips and tricks. And it's interesting for this award ceremony that I'm doing. They want people to, when they win the award, to pop on and do the, oh, thank you for my Oscar, that type of thing. But what I have to do, which is great, is I have to send them a little cheat sheet. They're not really presenting. It's like, make sure you have something that's maybe 3 minutes if you're called on. Make sure your background looks good. Make sure you don't have rollers in your hair, anything like that, just so that it kind of keeps the level up. And it's interesting because in the past, when I've done that for people, like, I didn't even think about that. And I know for a lot of larger conferences as well, sometimes people need the equipment so that they look a little bit more presentable, be it a light or a better microphone or headphones or something like that. And you can get these kind of packages sent to them so that they can use it, so that it's not an onus on them to buy it. Use it, send it to them, show them how to use it, make sure they're comfortable with the technology, as we mentioned before, and move forward that way.
Very smart. And you give them tips such as make sure that there's no one going to be walking past in the background.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
kick the
your
kids
dog
out.
is not going to bark.
Yeah. And that you've got enough bandwidth, kick the kids off all the games.
Yeah. No, it's little things like that like are just basic. It's not rocket science by any means, but it's just kind of one of those things that if people read it, they're kind of like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Or, maybe I shouldn't run the dishwasher while I'm paying attention to this session,
One of the things that we've taken to doing, because of all the construction in the area of the city where we live, and they keep moving the fiber, so our internet becomes intermittent, is now every time I'm in a meeting is we've got the phone ready to piggyback and use it as a hotspot when my internet goes down. It's not if, it's when. And right in the middle of an important piece. So we always have ready with a backup plan around this so that there's a continuity. And the other stuff about, making sure that people are actually comfortable with the medium that they're using. If you are a presenter or you have to present in a session, like a year ago, you could get away with bad Zoom and you can't anymore. So if your computer's slow, if your internet is slow, if your equipment is not up to scratch, if it sounds like you're calling it from the bottom of a well, you need to up your game, right? Just think all the money you're not spending on renting an office now, you should be putting it into being able to run a virtual environment.
Yeah, because it's probably not going anywhere for the next little bit,
No.
All right, looks like Chris has a comment.
I was just going to say, just kind of on some of the presentation screening and stuff like that, even some of the user groups that we've run online, actually even in person, we try to encourage people to get out and speak no matter how long their topic is, because we realize that people need sometimes that first 10-minute spot, or 15, and then 20, then 30, before they get to the point where somebody says, hey, I need an hour-long presentation out of you, and you're like, yeah, that's no problem. I do that all the time, right? I could do that without a script. But people do need to kind of go through those progressions. So we're always, in our user groups outside of meetings and still encouraging people to, step in with whatever content they have and whatever they're comfortable speaking on for however long they're ready to speak on the topic, so they can kind of progress through to become more seasoned presenters. It's part of our mentorship program, I guess, and around user groups and things like that.
It's often harder to speak for 5 minutes than it is to speak for an hour.
Sometimes it's hard just to keep it contained within 5 minutes.
Right, exactly. So we use a technique, like Pechakuch is one of them. We do these things called Ignite presentations, where you have 5 minutes, you speak on a topic to get, the high level stuff. You have 5 minutes, the slides are changing and you're not looking at them. Live, it's really cool because the slides are changing behind you and you don't see what's on the screen. But in a virtual environment, obviously you can see what's on the screen, but you still are speaking through the camera, not at the camera, and certainly not reading your notes, while the slides are changing to back up and reinforce whatever the messaging is that you're doing. And we use these often at the beginning of a session to set the tone, and then we go into the group and the breakout and that. But you only get 5 minutes, and they're really, really powerful. If you've never tried to do one before, try it, because it's terrifying. And you boiling what you need to say down into 5 minutes, where the slides are changing every 12 seconds, kind of thing. It's a really good technique builder for people who have to make presentations.
I'll build on that, Jeff, because of course I've seen you do it and I've done it. It's the timing. And you have to practice the timing. And it's the same with bigger presentations as well. I always recommend that you write your script. It's not just putting together some slides and then saying, oh, I'll talk to this and I'll talk to that. And of course, with live presentations, you might have a script, but often, remember, you'll have those little prompt cards. Well, treat yourself the same way. So it's either word for word, or more likely prompt cards, prompt text that you've got to remind yourself. But then you have to practice timing yourself to see that you are going to be within the allotted time that you have, be it 5 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever it may be. And there's software now, you can record yourself and you can listen back. You might not want to, but it's the best way to learn. And to keep practicing with that, but that way you get to see how you're coming across.
And that's actually a good way to kind of test your setup as well, to tell if you're talking from a well, is if you just practice and just kind of go, okay, no, I do sound clear. Oh, this light's good. I don't look like I'm sitting in my closet, trying to do a presentation.
One of the things, there's a little company out of Vancouver called Inbo, and they have these little card decks that they'll sell you for use in virtual meetings and presentations and such, remote meetings. And they have one called Outspoken, when you can be a jerk. We won't look at that one, but and so the idea is that I've seen organizations that do this where they're dealing with remote teams. Everybody gets a deck. And so they have there's a bunch of blank cards in them, but they also have things like, instead of you're on mute or whatever, they'll have, I'm looking for the right card now. See, I should have prepped this. I should have prepped this ahead of time, right?
There you go.
Jeff out of 6, 6 out of 6.
Well, yeah, you can do that too, but they have things where, if you, someone's frozen, rather than go, you're frozen. Someone just holds up a card that says, right? Or if they need a break, they'll just.
Instead of like clicking the Zoom coffee button or something like that.
Or they think there's a need for a breakout session. They'll hold up the the lab card. And again, it depends on the how serious your organization is. But there's lots of these kinds of things that can actually make increase the engagement, make things more fun. And more like if you were actually in the space with people. And don't be afraid to experiment with it, I guess is the other piece.
I saw a really interesting technique, I don't know where it might have been on LinkedIn, talking about people starting to label their meetings as walking meetings, where it's when you can this is one where you're expected to just listen. And if you want to go out for a walk during this meeting, go ahead, because everyone's sitting in front of their chairs so much more. Lasts a while we kind of need to break those things up. So that's kind of a neat technique too, to keep people engaged, not just in your meeting, but for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times it's used as well, Farine, when you're saying to get engagement, because it gives people sort of time in their own space while they're walking their dog or whatever, or walking around their living room, just to listen and process what might be coming up in conversation later. And it actually, I know for what they call event design.
There was a bit of a glitch there, Sandra. You froze.
Oh, stop. Yeah, they use it when they're doing experience design and such, that to kind of get people into the right frame so that when they come in, they're ready to participate.
So that somewhat goes with one of our conversation topics that we had beforehand, which was, how do you work with the loss of most of your body language? How does that affect how you're sharing your information?
I think like everybody goes to an online meeting and they sit at their desk, right? And Chris, you mentioned it, like get up and walk around. There's absolutely no reason
hard to do, but normally I try and stand up and still walk around like I'm actually speaking. Now, I've got my computer webcam on. Normally I have one up above me, but try and walk around like I'm actually teaching. I get most of my exercise during the day by talking and presenting, walking back and forth and getting all my steps in. And now that I'm online, I'm sitting in this chair all the time. So you kind of have to walk around, at least recreate an environment for yourself. Now, sometimes it's hard. I'm lucky I have a green screen environment and all kinds of different technologies, but I think we're going to all have to get used to those things as over the next while, because this is going to become more the norm. I shouldn't say more than the norm, it's going to be more and more of it.
Yeah, there is software, isn't there, Chris, that, and like you just said, you have 2 cameras, that you need more than 1 camera if you're doing something like that. But that also means you must have some sort of automated system to jump between your cameras, or you've got a separate techie person with you to track what you're doing.
We're actually experimenting with some of that stuff right now, where our guys can actually stand up and present themselves kind of a slide deck, and then them as actually they're a human being walking around the front of the room, just because it's good for audience engagement. And frankly, it's good to, once again, get that exercise thing, because I find that the more you sit, the less creative you start to become. Half my ideas, like you're kind of alluding to earlier, one of you, is you walk around and you start thinking of different things, or your best ideas come when you're driving down the road. So you have to kind of get up out of these chairs. I think that's a big thing that we got to start focusing in on a little bit more.
That's true. Oh, and I've got another suggestion as well, and that's the interactive whiteboard. That can really help to help with creativity. I actually did this the other day. Now, when you're presenting, you can do that depending on how many people are there, because it can get crazy if you've got one whiteboard and you've got hundreds of people on. But if you have a smaller group, you can use a virtual whiteboard. Google Jamboard, it's free, or Miro or Mural or any of these. And if you set them up, so you've got a preset to make sure that you've got those questions or topics there, and then you can literally stand up and have it in a separate box on your screen, and people can join it as well, and they can put their stickies on, and you can do some really creative stuff that way and get people engaged. And Chris is just going to demonstrate.
Oh, I just decided to stand up. I've been sitting all morning long, so
I think it's brilliant. And what do you normally project onto your green screen?
In Teams, I have my background, because that's one thing about online meetings, especially given we do lots of sales, is I want people to constantly have our company's logo burnt into their minds. So normally I have our it's an opportunity for me to advertise.
And have you ever tried to Have you tried to do like a presentation on your green screen so that you can pretend like that you're, you know,
You
like
can
going,
be, so you can be like the weatherman in the morning.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Have
exactly.
you,
Yeah. No, that's a couple of our folks are experimenting with that, so that you can actually walk around and see from body down and stuff like that. And it's actually like your person kind of virtually be there. So some stuff we're playing with right now, because like I say, good. We're
Yeah.
trying to figure out what the new world's going to look like here.
well,
We're-
because there's nothing worse than being pixelated in front of your presentation and then losing part of, you know, losing part of your face and looking like a cyborg or something like that while you're presenting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the other thing I'm finding is that there's a lot more impetus now for people to stop doing, you know, death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
You know, and reading, you know, a book that's, you know, recreated in a bunch of PowerPoint slides. So I think people are getting much more into real visual stuff and using, you know, as a backup to what they're saying, as not what they're saying on the screen. And I saw something really cool the other day. Like Prezi was a neat little tool that people started using, and then kind of stopped. But in a virtual world where you now have that motion going on and things are moving around and you're talking as the as things move in Prezi. If you're not familiar with it, it's, you know, Prezi.io, I think.
Yeah, I
Anyway.
actually had someone asking me about that yesterday.
Yeah. The other one that's really cool, if you can pre-do it ahead of time, is there's a neat tool called Doodly. So you can do those, like those whiteboard animations. And embed those into what you're talking about. So you're a little talking head off the side talking about whatever you're talking about, but it's all being drawn out on the screen in animation while you're talking about it. You've got to prep that ahead of time. So that works in a conference kind of an environment. But it's really, really powerful stuff. Movement and all that. It kind of goes along with what you're saying about the body language, but it's the movement piece that draws people in and gets them engaged in it. Nothing worse than static PowerPoint.
Yeah, that's something that we've been using a lot more last while we're doing our training and stuff is animations to bring things a little bit more alive. And I kind of wish we'd have been using it a long time ago in a lot of our stuff. But because normally I would have a whiteboard or something I could go draw and kind of big ideas up and kind of, you know, put a picture together slowly over a course of a couple hours. But animations are certainly helpful too. So you're correct.
Yeah, if anybody look up, there's a fella, you can see his YouTube stuff, a guy named Simon Bowen. Bowen. He's an Aussie, and he does visual models. And what he does, he'll be talking on screen the way we are, but he's got a second screen running, which is his iPad, and he's literally drawing stuff out as he's talking on the iPad, and it's really, really captivating to watch. And he'll walk through it like in a meeting where they're problem solving. That's how he does problem solving. It's normally it would be on a whiteboard, right? Scribble, scribble, scribble. That's what every good consultant does. But he's doing it now virtually using an iPad. And I think Notably is the app he's using on the iPad, connected in as a second screen into the presentation on a shared screen. And so yeah, you can see it doing it on, and there's a bunch of YouTubes where he's doing it, in his own website he's doing it, but it's absolutely brilliant, you know. And I've seen the other similar to that, again, to get engagement, to get people thinking, is just having a separate camera pointing down at a piece of paper and drawing it out on the piece of paper like you would have done back in the old days, for anybody who's old enough to remember overhead projectors.
Yeah, I remember those.
And you would draw on it like back before PowerPoint. And it was so cool because you could get engagement, and you could made a mistake, you'd rub it out, you change it around and everything else. And we used to do that in training sessions back when overheads were a thing. Well, we can still do it.
I've got the same thing. I got my Microsoft Surface right here, and I use Microsoft Whiteboard, and I can draw things because I'm a whiteboard person. Anyone who's ever been in a live meeting with me knows it takes about 10 minutes for me to run up to the board and grab a felt and start drawing and getting my engagement that way. And we have to start using this thing to do the same thing as well. And I used to, at the end of a session, take a picture of the whiteboard and then give it people a picture. Well, that actually makes my life a little bit easier is by using this thing. So there's been a lot of positives on this. Yeah, I can screenshot things and take pictures through the way as well. So it gives kind of almost an animation to my whiteboard.
Brilliant. So Chris, when you're doing that, is it also when you're drawing on your surface, is it showing behind you on your screen?
No, I usually just make this the screen share. Say, okay,
Okay.
just turn this on the
Okay,
screen,
so
and
you
then
can
people are
talk.
watching me draw it out.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Should make you demo that right now, Chris.
I'm using Zoom, so I can't. So
Slightly different.
Isn't that interesting? So it's the system that you are used to using. Because every time I go on Teams, my background disappears, and yeah, I feel like a fish out of water. I can make it work, but it's because I'm using Zoom so much more that I'm using that. But I know that there's others, like instructors using Blue Jeans, and you know, same thing. If they're just using that type, you become an expert on whatever software you most frequently use. But then if you're going to use something else, yeah, you've got to accept that it's going to be very different.
Yeah, there's no such thing as software that doesn't require some training. I know I get in front of people all the time. They're like, oh, if I require training, it's not good enough. It's like, you're destined to fail. Then everything you do requires some level of training and best practices. And here's a good way to use it. Those people all figure it out on their own. Everyone does it differently. You know, I've seen plenty of Teams environments work really well, and I've seen plenty of Teams environments look terrible. So it's all about the users you're putting in front of things, and everything requires training and comfort level, right? We're humans. We want to stick with things we know, right?
Well, and it's interesting as well that even for as much as, you know, a lot of people are using Zoom just because it's accessible or whatever, or I'm sure it happens in Teams as well. I know that I was on a call yesterday and someone had just set up the free Zoom, and there was 4 of us, and they've been using Zoom for a year. They had no idea that if 4 people got on it and it was the free version, that it would bounce you out.
Oh, after 30 minutes, yes.
Yeah, it's so funny because I was talking to them, and all of a sudden I'm like, why is there a countdown clock? And I'm just like, oh, and then thinking to myself, okay, finish your thought and then tell them about the countdown clock, because they're probably not aware, and it zipped me right out.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. It was a meeting, not a big presentation where it's like, and then
Yeah.
So kind of on that note, for especially if you're using something you're not used to, or if someone's having you present for them, do you ever have a moderator, especially if it's something you're not used to?
Never Zoom alone, or team alone, probably in your case. That's the one sort of, if you have the opportunity, make sure that you have someone, like you're doing a great job of moderating, keeping things going, you know, making sure that they're watching the chat. You know, obviously Sheila's been watching the chat as well and putting things in as well. It just kind of keeps the flow, because what happens if I'm presenting, if I'm kind of looking down going, oh wait, someone's asking me a question, oh wait, this, that, it kind of takes away from the fluidity of what I'm trying to say. I'm sure that you guys have found this as well when you're trying to present.
Yeah, having a technical resource and a moderator, someone that's allowing others in and handling any individual challenges that are going on. And indeed, like Rose has been doing, tracking the chat and presenting, you know, whenever there's a question there.
Or even doing what some people call like air traffic control.
Yeah.
If everybody's wanting to ask questions and stuff like that, then, you know, the moderator can prioritize and kind of like, okay, you know, Jeff, I see you have a question. Chris, I see you have a question. Jeff, can you unmute and go first? All right, Chris. And kind of keeps a little bit order so that you're not all having trying to have a conversation. I realize that, you know, around the boardroom table, it might end up being like that, but it kind of prevents it in this kind of situation.
Yeah,
and that's somewhat what we have
with
at
larger groups.
Yeah,
and that's somewhat what you always have at a in-person conference.
Yeah, I'd say like it's kind of what Jeff was alluding to. To me, it's the size of the group. I feel that I can, I don't know, 15 people I can handle on my own. The way I can do that is I've got a multi-monitor setup. I'm lucky enough that I have 3 monitors sitting around me. I can make sure the hand waving screen's up in front of me, and it alerts me and stuff like that. Other people don't have that. If you have single monitor, then you definitely need a monitor, because you can't possibly keep on top of everything. and our user groups that we run, we have a moderator because usually there's so many different questions and stuff going on. Somebody's got to control that. I'm actually starting teaching at SAIT next week for 3 weeks. I have 60 people in my class for the first time ever, and I'm not used to teaching that many people online. Luckily enough, they're supplying with a moderator to deal with that, because that's
Yeah.
I even asked the instructor, I said, well, what are your tips in teaching a large online class like this? And he said, sometimes the questions come at you so quick that you can't answer them. People start accusing you of not answering their questions. So, and I'm like, okay, I don't want that. I want to make sure I'm paying attention to everybody, but that's where, it's a size thing, and then having a good setup that kind of alerts you to things as well.
Can you ask them, Chris, to submit their questions either ahead of time, ideally, or after class as well, to say there's no time in class to answer all of these questions? So
that's a tough one, because I've always been a fan of that audience engagement. It's important in person, and then even more now to answer those questions on the spot, because that's when it's top of mind for everybody, and it gives you a chance to break away from the presentation. So I like that, and most of the time people's questions aren't really pre-canned. On some of the stuff we do. So I like when they ask those questions on the fly. It's just a matter of managing if they come at you really quickly.
And it's the bigger the meeting, the even more important it is to have a mod or several, right? And a technical producer, someone running the back end of the thing, because you just don't have the capacity. Like for a meeting this size, it's like more of a fireside chat. It's relatively easy. If this was 20 people or more, we'd start needing more and more external support, right? And there's a tendency to blame the tools, but it's not the tools' fault, right? As if it was a live, conference or whatever, you'd have people stage managing things, you'd have people running AV, you'd have people doing all kinds of stuff, up to a cast of thousands. And we have this tendency to believe that, hey, I can run this whole thing off my laptop and it'll be perfect. And the answer is, no, it won't.
There's some things I find that in technology are actually making it easier to manage a large group in certain situations. And number one is the hand raising functionality. How many of us have been in a presentation where something comes up and suddenly 6 hands go up and you're like, who rose their hand first? Like, where do I go? Right. And you're kind of in that who's first. Whereas in these, you can get it all queued up. Here's the first, second, third, fourth, and go through the questions that way. And I find that really helps, helps control things a little bit more, and removes the bias away from me. I'll pick you first. Why'd you pick them? And all that kind of stuff.
That's very true. Yeah, I do like the hand raising. I was just going to say that since we've only got a few minutes, and Rose is doing a great job at moderating us, because we almost let her have a word in edgeways. But I'm going to propose that I'll just say a couple of final tips, and that is that what I forgot about earlier when we were talking about interactive tips like Doodly and Prezi, etc. Padlet. If you haven't tried Padlet, that's another great tool. And it can be, and Chris, it was actually stimulating thinking about your class, because I've used this in class as well. And it's where you can build on topics and it's almost like those discussion threads, but using Padlet can be quite useful. That's padlet.com. My message, or my thought to leave you with from me, is that if you are presenting to a larger group, it's to show your passion and to use images wisely in how you're doing it, and to focus on your core message. Don't try and cram. Actually, Jeff, you talked about this, that don't put your whole white paper into your presentation. Keep it simple, focus on your core message, get your point across. That's my tips. Who else?
Chris?
I'm sorry. Just trying to think of what I want to say here.
No problem.
I would agree with Sheila. It's same as all presentations, right? Just you keep your message, just say for the audience, to somehow trying to keep them engaged. And now we're all learning this stuff. The technology keeps improving, and it's moving at such a rapid pace that you guys are talking about tools I've never even heard of, other than Doodly, because it shows up on my Facebook every now and again. But yeah, we're always learning and pushing the envelope on things, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you get inundated with tools. Now I get 50 tools I have to learn and figure out what they do, and at some point they start consolidating.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the toolbox tends to fill up, and everybody, you know, there's all kinds of cool new tools. It's way better to be really, really, really proficient with a couple or three tools and really know them and use them well than it is to try and use all this gee whiz flashbang stuff.
Yeah,
because it becomes distracting.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking that I remember looking at some website where they were comparing different platforms, and there was seriously about 100 that someone took the time to compare.
Yeah.
And you kind of looking at it, you're kind of like, well, they all kind of do the same thing. Oh, this one I can, you know, this one's easy to put a logo in. Oh, this one's easy to do this, but like you say, become very good at and comfortable with the technology, and that'll probably do you a lot better.
Yeah. And that's the other thing for me is remember who your audience is, and package whatever you're doing, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a webinar, whether it's a training session or whatever else. It's not about you. Well, sometimes the webinar is, but but really it's about what are you giving to the audience, and are they going to get what they came there for, right? And it's even easier now in a virtual world to forget that the only reason you're up there beacon off is because there's people there that came to learn something or hear something or take something away. And so you've always got to keep that front and center. And
that's exactly, I know that I'm doing a training session in a couple of weeks, and it was interesting when I was speaking with the person who asked me to do the training, and it's a training on Zoom and virtual meetings. And I said, now can I talk to your board and send out some questions so that I can figure out where they're at, you know, so that I'm not standing there telling them, make sure you hit this button, or that, you know, I said, obviously, you know, what's their level of knowledge and what do they want to learn?
Yeah.
And as Sheila has just posted in the chat, remember to check your settings, especially if your children were using the tools before you, so you don't end up like it looking like a cat or the like.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's worth watching. The poor man.
Or the floating head. Right?
Yeah.
I guess
sunglasses.
What other questions does anybody have? Anything we haven't answered? Anything specific you want to talk about? Because we're almost out of time, but we can stay later if you want.
Or you can send questions to ReSourceYYC and we can try
and do our best to answer them, assuming there's an answer.
That's the joy of the recording, because this is being recorded, so I know Rose is going to upload it. So if anyone else is watching it after, then they can ask questions. Great, Claire.
Excellent.
That was fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for presenting. Looks like we had a few people who got some good tips out of that, and you all each seem to have gotten a few tips as well.
Yep. Well, you learn something every time you do one of these, right?
No, exactly.
And so it's really great to be to be able to be on these and interact with people.
Yep. Thank you, guys. It's great to see you all again.
Yeah.
Excellent. Talk to you later, everybody.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.